When parents ask me how they can be better parents, I have one non-psychological answer that I think matters more than any other answer, and it's this: get enough sleep. Have you noticed that you're a lousy parent when you're tired, but when you've had enough sleep, and I know sometimes it feels like that was a long time ago, but when you've had enough sleep, it's amazing how good you are, how good you feel, how patient you are, how regulated you are. Hello and welcome to the Happy Families Podcast, the real parenting solutions every day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson, and today I am joined by sleep specialist extraordinaire. Dr. Moyra Vandeleur is a respiratory and sleep specialist at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. We've got some results from the latest children's health poll that comes out of the RCH, and we're going to discuss sleep today. Not so much your sleep, although that might come up, but absolutely your beliefs about your children's sleep and how that works out for them. Dr. Moyra, I'm so glad you're joining me. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Justin. I love talking about sleep, so I'm in the right place.
It's one of those things where you talk about sleep and the obvious joke is, I hope I don't put you to sleep, but I find sleep fascinating. Like, I can't wait for our discussion. I've been looking forward to this for a few days since we booked it in. Before we kick off, though, I want to do something a bit unusual just to make sure everyone is fully awake. I've put together a list of common ideas about sleep. Some of them are true, some of them are false. Some of them you'll just say absolutely yes, others are completely no. I know that a couple of them are a little bit murky, but I'd like to start with a quick game. We're not going to hold you up to any kind of horrendous academic scrutiny here. We're just looking for what's useful for parents to know. I'm going to give you a couple of passes. So it's a lightning round. It's just yes or no, true or false. But if you really do have to elaborate, we'll let you do that on two. We can come back to others later in the conversation if that's okay. Does that sound horribly unfair?
Very unfair, but let's do it.
All right. Number one, true or false? Teens who can't get up for school are just being lazy.
100% false.
Oh, that was much stronger than I thought. Next one, a child who reads on a tablet before bed gets the same quality of sleep as one who's reading a physical book.
False.
Teens naturally need much less sleep than primary school children.
Not much less, but yes, less sleep.
Okay, so
that was a little bit of a politician's answer, wasn't it?
What I heard was teens don't need as much sleep as primary school age children as a general rule is what I heard.
Yes.
Okay. Kids can catch up on lost sleep during the weekend.
They can, but it's not effective in the long term.
Okay. All right. I'll take that as a yeah, nah.
Let's talk later.
That's a really Australian phrase. Yeah, nah. Here's the next one. Exercise right before bedtime helps children sleep better.
No, false.
So my wife has been right. Don't rile the kids up before bed.
Your wife is the expert. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Keeping a consistent bedtime only matters on school nights. True or false?
False.
Screen time before bed can help kids to wind down.
False.
I love the way we're not videoing this, but the look on your face as it was this disapproving stare down the camera like, can we please just get the kids on
my
screen?
poker face isn't working too well.
Not at all.
No.
All right, I have two more. Warm milk before bed is scientifically proven to help kids sleep.
I haven't looked up the evidence on this recently. You might have got me there, Justin. I don't know about the science, but
my grandma,
maybe case by case.
Oh, my grandma was a big believer in the warm milk before bed to settle the tummy and get the kids asleep.
Well, she might be onto something. As long as you weren't a bedwetter, maybe it was helpful.
Right, okay. All right, here's the last one. Children who share a room typically have worse sleep quality.
Not always.
Okay.
I'll pass on that one.
Okay, yeah.
We can talk about the importance of a healthy or sort of optimal sleep environment later, I guess. But I would say there's no hard and fast rule about that.
Interesting. I thought I'd throw that one in there because the concept of a sleep divorce for adults has become quite popular in recent years. That is, you can stay married, but just sleep in different rooms because the quality of your sleep is better when you're not sharing the bed. And I thought, I wonder if kids, I know that when my kids share a room, which we live in a fairly modest home on the Sunshine Coast because it's a pricey place to live, and we've got kids that are sharing rooms, and we find that they go to sleep much later, but they still seem to sleep pretty well.
Look, we know that a dark, quiet room will help with sleep. I guess if one of your children was really noisy and snoring or sleep talking, they might interfere with the sleep of the other. But I mean, generally speaking, there are no hard and fast rules. And I think if you have a good sleep routine for both children, and obviously there's a dynamic between the two kids, and that might change with age as well. But I mean, I certainly wouldn't commit to saying that kids sharing a room is a bad or necessarily a good thing. I think in my experience looking after kids with sleep problems, there are some children that probably do better actually sharing a room. So kids that have anxiety, a sort of separation anxiety, they might do better with a sibling sleeping in their room. No hard and fast rules about that one.
What I do know is that parents who share a room with a bed with a toddler do not get any sleep at all. That's
Yeah. Well, I mean, babies and toddlers. Toddlers are very restless, so we know that with age, a toddler compared to an adolescent is going to naturally and normally move around a lot more during sleep. So, yeah, for lots of reasons, probably I can understand why you wouldn't be getting much sleep with a toddler.
Yeah, starfish, that's their favourite pose. Starfish while they sleep, just arms and legs out as much as they can. Okay, thanks for humouring me with some fun questions. Let's step into, I guess, a broader and deeper discussion about sleep. Can you explain what the recommended amount of sleep is for different age groups, starting with our youngest kids going right through to later adolescence? But to kick that off, I guess there's going to be some caveats, right? We're talking about averages here. So what do we need to know when it comes to how much sleep kids need?
So, look, that is an important question. I guess the caveat, I should probably start with the caveat, which is that every individual, whilst there are guidances or guidelines around how much sleep children need, it really is an individual thing. So I guess what I mean by that is that one child, might be getting the recommended amount of sleep as per the guidelines, whereas if you find that your child is tired, then I'd probably recommend that you try and extend their sleep with an earlier bedtime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things as well where I think most parents just say, go to bed because you're tired. And when you wake up in the morning, we'll get things going. So, Dr. Moyra, how much sleep should our kids be getting? Let's just start with the toddlers.
Okay. So, Justin, that is a really important question. I should start really by saying that every child needs a different amount of sleep. And obviously that changes as they age. As a guide for toddlers, so from age 1 to 3 years, we would recommend 12 to 14 hours.
Right. And that's in a 24-hour period, isn't it? It's not like it's 12 to 14 hours at night because toddlers often have a daytime nap.
That's really important to remember exactly. It's a 24-hour period, so 12 to 14 hours in 24. I should really explain a little further, though. When we talk about recommended hours of sleep, if your child is getting the recommended hours of sleep and still seems tired or, there are behaviours that you think might be in the setting of not getting enough sleep, it's important to keep in mind that we all have different sleep needs. So trying to extend the amount of sleep your child's getting and seeing if it makes a difference, it would definitely be worthwhile.
And I guess the inverse would be true as well. If you're trying to get them to go to sleep and they won't, and then they still wake up energized even though they had less sleep than you think, and that's a consistent pattern, then maybe they don't need that 12 to 14, maybe they need 11 to 12.
Yeah, correct. When we think about getting enough sleep for your child, there's 3 things that make up healthy sleep.
Yeah.
One of them is getting enough sleep. And as we've just said, that there might be slight, variations between individuals for how much they need. The other is the quality of their sleep, so that they're sleeping through, that they don't have any sort of issues that are interfering with their sleep quality, like snoring and sleep apnea. And then the third thing that we know contributes to healthy sleep is a regular sleep pattern. So regular bedtime and regular amounts of sleep. So they're the sort of 3 things that are important to think about with healthy sleep.
Okay, we're going to come back to some of that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Let's move to the preschoolers. On average, assuming that the quality's decent and we've got a decent pattern, in a 24-hour period for our 3 to 5-year-olds, what should we be usually looking at? Something in the ballpark of?
Yep. So a little bit less, so 10 to 12 hours for that sort of preschool 3 to 6 year age group.
Okay. And then as we move
Yep.
into middle childhood, kids between, let's say, primary school age 5 to 12.
Yep. So 10 to 11 hours.
Okay. So that's interesting because the preschoolers right through to about that early adolescent period, it sort of hovers around that 10 to 12 hour range-ish. So there's obviously a lot of variability. Teenagers, we talked about this with my lightning round question. You said that they do need less sleep than the little kids. Where do we land here?
So for teenage kids,
Yeah.
high school, 13 to 18 years, we'd say 8 to 10 hours. This is a bit interesting, actually, because we recommend 8 to 10, but more recently there's some research that's come out in favour of sort of more 9+ hours of sleep. I guess it all just comes back to the child and whether they're rested with that amount of sleep.
Okay. I have a question for you that is the source of a little bit of conflict in my home. So I'm currently raising my 5th 14-year-old daughter. We have 6 daughters. Our youngest is turning 11 soon, and she will be my final teenager I'll ever have to raise. And it's been a delight for the most part, but every now and again it gets tricky, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And a source of ongoing frustration is that the kids do get enough sleep during the week. That is, they're having appropriate amounts, somewhere around about 10 hours a night, sometimes a fraction less, usually about right though. But on weekends, they just don't want to get out of bed. And they're happy to sleep for 14 hours.
Jeez.
You've talked about sleep patterns. What is this doing to them, if anything? Is it good? Do they need to have that catch-up sleep? Or am I right and they should be getting out of bed first thing in the morning, coming down to the beach with me for a walk along the beach, a swim in the ocean, getting a little bit of that Andrew Huberman sunlight hitting them as soon as the sun comes over the horizon? Am I too full on here? Should I just let them sleep in on the weekend because they're teenagers, which is what I am doing at the moment, if I'm honest?
Look, you're probably, there's always caveats, but you're probably doing the right thing in the sense that I would say to parents that any sleep is good sleep, although, so sleep is good, all right?
As a parent, I definitely do agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. For the teenager, so for your daughters, if they are well rested during the week, they're able to concentrate at school, they get up in the morning, they're not sort of really grumpy and tired, they're not having afternoon sleeps, you feel convinced and they report that they're pretty rested and they're not having trouble getting to sleep during the week, then a sleep in on the weekend, there's no issue with that. I guess the question is, why are they needing that sleep? Because your daughters
they're lazy, Dr. Moyra, because they're...
so I think this is, it's important to try and understand or to think about this a bit, because I would say, and your daughters aside, but if you're getting 14 hours sleep on the week, if you're needing 14 hours on the weekend, is there a reason for that? Does that mean that they really are catching up on sleep? Because the idea of catch-up sleep is that you're not getting enough sleep during the week. So I'd be less surprised if you told me that your daughters were getting 7 hours of sleep generally during the week and then needed that extra sleep on the weekend, because generally catch-up sleep is exactly that. They're making up for some sort of deficit. So whenever parents tell me that their child is having difficulty getting up in the morning, rather than jumping to the conclusion that they're lazy, I'd be more curious about how much sleep they're getting and is the sleep good quality. So my first thought about a teenager who doesn't want to get up in the morning is that because they haven't had a good night's sleep? Is that because they're chronically sleep deprived? I guess the other thing is, there's a difference between genuinely sleeping in till 10, 11, 12 o'clock and lying in bed looking at your smartphone, texting with friends and having a good time. So, there could be a
little bit of, there's no phones in our bedrooms apparently, but there might be a little bit of that going on.
There might be a bit of,
Dr Moyra Vandeleur from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, I have a question for you about physical activity and sleep. Data from around this nation unfortunately highlights that our children are simply not moving their bodies. Certainly not like we did 10, 20, 40 years ago, physical activity rates have dropped through the floor relative to where they've been historically. And certainly neither adults nor children on average are getting the minimum daily requirement of physical activity. Surely that's impacting sleep.
Absolutely. So we know that regular exercise really sets your children up for a good night's sleep. And it's so important. I guess what we also know, or the caveat, I'm full of caveats today, is that vigorous activity or vigorous exercise in the hour before sleep, it can be stimulating or arousing. And so that isn't good for sleep. But daily, regular physical activity, whatever your child enjoys, is really of benefit to set you up for a good night's sleep.
Let's talk about sleep patterns then, because this is something that you highlighted before. You said you know that you've got a sleep problem if there's an issue with the quantity of sleep, the quality of sleep, or the pattern of sleep. And when you talk about sleep patterns, you're talking about consistent bedtimes, consistent wake-up times, the sort of that sleep routine. So the child health poll that has just had results come through shows that, and this really blew me away, 42%. 42% of children have problems with their sleep patterns. What does that tell you?
We were surprised too. You know, I mean, for me working in sleep clinic, these are the kids I see.
Yeah.
I see kids with issues with their sleep, whether it's falling asleep, staying asleep, being tired, not getting good sleep, kids with sleep apnea. But I was really interested in the results as well, because that's almost half.
It's massive.
And I guess we, you know, if you look at the studies from around the world, we know that about a third of school-age children have some sort of behavioural sleep issue. So I guess in terms of, you know, an issue with their sleep pattern, it was sort of higher than we expected. But it's interesting, and I guess the purpose to the poll was then to better understand what sort of issues were contributing to those problems with sleep pattern.
Okay, let's go a little bit deeper here. Why is the problem there? And maybe I can tap into what you've highlighted in the research that was done by the RCH. The study revealed that children who use screens before bed are twice as likely to have difficulty sleeping. And yet you also found, this was another statistic that staggered me, in spite of all of the work that I've been doing, Dr. Moyra, 47% of parents believe that screen time helps kids wind down. So what I'd like to understand is why do so many parents think that, I mean, this is half of parents that you are surveying across a general part of the population. Why do half of parents believe that screen time helps kids wind down? Is it because they sit on the couch and watch TV at night and they feel like that's helping them to wind down, or is there something else going on? This seems mind-blowing to me.
The poll results were really interesting because it highlighted a lot of those misbeliefs about what is helpful for sleep. So you mentioned, you know, a high rate of parents reporting that they thought that screens were part of a wind down routine. And there were other things as well that were surprising to us. For instance, that, you know, the majority of parents, or the majority of children, or a substantial number of children rather, had difficulty getting off to sleep and didn't have regular bedtimes. But in terms of your question about why, I think you could be right. I think it could be that perhaps parents associate their own screen time, sitting in front of the TV and enjoying a movie or a program before bed, as being a typical wind down thing, and that somehow that translates or is similar to a child on their phone or their device or watching TV before bed. I mean, there's a lot in the media about, you know, the growth in sort of screen use amongst young people. And I guess the thing about using different screens, particularly for teenagers, is that they're generally introduced as an education tool, you know. So there are, you know, benefits to our young people having screen access. But I think what we know as sleep specialists is that the light, the blue light that's emitted from screens, really can make it problematic to falling asleep, because that light switches off the release of our sleepy hormone, which is called melatonin. And so any sort of exposure to screens and that sort of blue light that comes from phones and iPads, video games, can reduce the melatonin secretion and make it difficult to fall asleep. I guess the other thing relates not only to that sort of more physiological effect of screens, but also the content of what you're watching is important too. So kids that are on phones and iPads, engaging with friends, that sort of interaction can be quite stimulating and really doesn't set you up for that wind down period before bed. I guess the noise and the light that comes from phones is another reason why we think having screens at bedtime and overnight isn't a great idea. To loop back to the question you asked me, which is why do parents think that? We sort of think about where do we get our information from? We don't have children and get some sort of little booklet on all the things to do with child health and parenting. And people get their information from lots of different sources. And, most parents are just trying to obviously do the best they can with their kids. But I guess what the poll really revealed is that there's a lot of misconceptions about sleep, and some of those misconceptions can lead to behaviours in sleep that set them up, in children, that set them up to have an issue with their sleep.
I feel like screens are really at the core of everything else that you found.
Yeah.
Another stat that came out of it, you found that teen sleep patterns are dramatically different from younger kids. 41% of teens feel tired in the morning compared to 27% of younger kids. I'd note that you didn't ask parents because you would have found that 99.9% of parents feel tired in the morning. But maybe let's go a little bit deeper here. If we can step outside of the screen issue, clearly teens are much more likely to be on a screen at night than younger children. There are other biological factors here, though, aren't there? Like the adolescent hormonal and neurological architecture is different for younger children, and that has some impact on sleep.
Yeah, correct. So, it's a normal part of teenage development that there's changes in hormones, and I think it's very normal and natural that there are changes in our body clock or changes in the body clock of teenagers, and that's circadian body clock, if you like, that directs all sorts of activities within the body, and one of them is sleep. And what happens for teenagers is that naturally they want to stay up later and they want to sleep in later. So it's part of healthy, normal teenage development that teenagers are going to want to stay awake later than their younger siblings. Yeah.
It's a source of great stress and struggle for any parent of a teenager, because there's this thing, you get used to the kids for the first 10, 12 years of life. You put the kids to bed and then you go and have adult time because the kids have gone to bed. It's wonderful when they go to bed at 6 or 6:30, and as they get older it gets progressively later until it's 7 and 7:30 and 8 o'clock. And then they kind of hit 13, 14, and by then you're older as well as an adult, and you're ready for bed at about 5:30. Let's be honest, but you push through because the kids. We got to a point, as I'm sure any parent of older adolescents has, where we say goodnight to the kids and then we go to bed and close the door, and they just put themselves to bed because we can't stay up any later. This is a really common challenge that parents have, and you're sort of like, promise you're going to go to bed by 9:30 because it's 9 o'clock and I am tapping out. I'm done.
Yeah.
Moyra, let's sort of move towards a couple of conversation points that have been quite striking for me. I'm not a caffeine consumer myself, so I only drink water. That's one of my personal health rules. I just have a thing. I'm not going to consume my calories in my fluids. I want to eat my calories, not drink them. So I only drink water. However, lots of people love their coffees. Your research has shown a strong connection between caffeine consumption that happens after lunch and sleep difficulties. And we know that many parents, as the kids move into their mid and late teens, are increasingly comfortable with their kids drinking coffees. What's your advice around that?
Yeah. Well, you're right. So firstly, I guess what the poll data showed was that about 10, I think it might have been 11% of children are consuming caffeine-containing products regularly during the week. And I guess that's, so you mentioned coffee, and coffee's the obvious thing.
But it could be the energy drinks as well, I guess.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, energy drinks that contain caffeine, there's lots of sort of new, sort of more, well, I think they're being marketed as sort of healthy alternatives to coffee, like
Yeah.
matcha or green tea,
Yeah.
that are not only, well, that are found, those sorts of flavors as well, found in lots of products, chocolate, all sorts of things that contain caffeine. So, I guess what we know is that caffeine takes about 6 hours. Well, it's active in your system for about 6 hours. So, the first thing to say really is that if your child is having issues falling asleep and if your child is consuming caffeine containing products, it would be worth looking at the timing of eating and drinking those products, because having them before lunch is probably going to have less impact on their sleep. I think the key thing, though, is probably awareness that there are many things that you wouldn't think contain caffeine that do. I think that's probably one of the issues here. And if you look at energy drinks, for instance, some of them have caffeine and some of them do not have caffeine. So I think the interesting thing to think about with teenagers and energy drinks is why are they drinking those? And is it a bit of
I was
a
going to ask
sort
that.
of,
Yeah.
bi-directional? Is it that, they're tired, so they're consuming them and they're drinking caffeine and that's contributing? It may be the case, or it may just be that they enjoy drinking those drinks.
I have a provocative question for you around caffeine.
Yes.
I'm a fan of listening to podcasts about health. There's a guy called Steve Bartlett who does the Diary of a CEO, and he's always having the latest health expert on. Huberman, I mentioned before. Everyone knows that Andrew Huberman's podcast is the world's leading health podcast. And it seems that everyone has a different opinion about caffeine, whether it's beneficial or not. Some people say stay away from it, don't have it at all. Other people say it's the wonder drug and you need more of it in your life. It seems to be a really provocative topic. I'm not asking about adults here. I'm genuinely concerned because I do regularly see parents willingly and joyfully handing caffeine products over to their kids, whether it's on a Saturday morning at sport or, I don't know, wherever it might be. Kids and caffeine, yes or no?
I would say no, because there are many products, if it's just a sort of about a taste or an experience, and there's probably an equivalent product that doesn't have caffeine in it. Beyond the impact on sleep, and there's probably at low levels no other negative health impacts of caffeine. But I guess the question is, why does a child need to be consuming caffeine? So, I mean, that's somewhat of a personal view. I think strictly related to sleep and sleep problems, the key thing is, if a child is having issues falling asleep and you have a look at what they're eating and drinking and there's something caffeine related that as a parent you think you still want to let your child have, then give it in the morning, not the afternoon. But I mean, it's also, I guess it's a cultural thing as well, Justin, because, we think about Italian culture and families that, desserts like tiramisu, so it's sort of hard to say yes or no when it comes to these sorts of things, because I think it's a bit of a personal one for families. And I think a lot of the advice that we give about sleep is really, it's very important for families that are struggling with sleep issues in their child. But again, I guess you asked me about your child who was sleeping in on the weekend. If they're otherwise healthy, happy, they're getting enough sleep, probably we tend to not be so concerned about sleeping in. So it always comes back to whether there's actually a problem and whether the child and parent are identifying something as a problem. Yeah.
Eating, you mentioned tiramisu.
I don't know why I mentioned tiramisu.
Well, no, but it's loaded with caffeine and sugar.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm really hearing you say is, if you want to have a good night's sleep, you want to reduce the things that are going to be stimulatory and that are going to keep you awake. So caffeine and sugar, you probably want to ease off on that and don't load the kids up with a plate full of anything like that when it's around bedtime.
I should actually say one of the other main issues for people in terms of kids or teenagers that have insomnia is the relationship between having a sleep issue and being anxious or having some sort of problem with mood.
I was going to ask about mental health and sleep.
Yeah. Well, caffeine, it might do a good job at keeping you awake, but can also make people feel anxious. So, you would wonder whether teenagers are more susceptible to those effects as well.
Wow. Okay, yeah, great advice. Okay, here's my last question for you. A lot of parents will be listening to this and saying, my kids are sleeping okay. Every now and again there's a rough night, but in the main things are okay. Based on all of the research that you've got, and given that we know that sleep is probably one of the most important factors for good health, full stop, period, end of story, what would you say is the single most important change that families could make tonight if they wanted to improve their kids' sleep?
I think the wind down, the pre-bed routine, and for that to be a relaxing activity.
I'm laughing because I'm so bad at this. This is fun
I think,
time.
Having a regular bedtime
Yeah.
and getting enough hours of sleep in general would be two pieces of gold, I think, for most families. And to have a regular bedtime and to get enough sleep, the focus should be on that hour before sleep. That's doing something, whatever it is for your child or your family, that is relaxing and sets them up for a good night's sleep. So generally, screen-free would be. You asked for one tip, and now I think
we're up to number 5 now. Here's what I'm hearing. I mean, the basics are: get the kids off screens an hour before bed, have a nice, easy, relaxing wind down, get them to go to bed at a consistent time and at a reasonable hour, so they can have the quality and the quantity that they need. That's what I'm feeling is really at the core of your message.
It's really important.
If a parent is worried that the child isn't getting enough sleep, is it the sort of thing that you just let nature take its course, like they'll mature through it, they'll be fine? Or do you recommend going and getting some support, some help from a medical practitioner, from a doctor around this?
I think that's a really important question, Justin. So if you have done everything you can to try and set up for a regular bedtime, you think that your child is getting enough sleep and they're still tired during the day, or you think there's some behaviours that are about tiredness and yet they're getting enough sleep, that would be a reason to go and see your GP. The other thing is, if you've tried really hard to try and support your child to get to sleep and they've got an issue, for instance, with insomnia and really struggling to get off to sleep, there might be something else going on. It's not all necessarily about good sleep hygiene. So, for instance, young people with anxiety can certainly have issues with their sleep, and often the way they present is with insomnia. So I think if you're really worried about your child's sleep and you've sort of exhausted all your strategies at home, it's definitely worth going to have a chat to your GP, and you might need a referral to a specialist. I guess the final thing to say is we haven't mentioned snoring. And I'd just like to put a plug in, I guess, that...
I see what you did there. Put a plug in. Never mind.
That snoring is never like regular snoring. So if your child snores more than 3 nights a week, that's not normal, and you should go and have a chat to your GP about it, because your child might have issues with sleep apnea.
This is such a fascinating conversation. I could talk sleep all day, but our time is well spent. I've been speaking with Dr Moyra Vandeleur, who is a respiratory and sleep specialist at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, about the Children's Health Poll. We will link to more details about that poll and the findings in the show notes. Dr Moyra, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise on the Happy Families podcast today.
Thanks so much, Justin. Great to be here.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. And if you'd like more information and resources about making your family happier, you'll find them at happyfamilies.com.au.